The 40-gram transformation. So when you started taking big gram doses,
I took 40 grams a day for a month, yeah.
what were the changes that you saw?
The main aha moments were when I fell off a stack of sheetrock onto a concrete floor 4 feet directly onto my tailbone. And it hurt like crazy, and went dancing a few hours later, and the next day I was fine except for a big bruise. When I was 10 years old, I decided I wanted to be a biochemist, to be a cancer researcher, to cure cancer. Cancer is more likely to develop when you have a lot of systemic inflammation. Glycine should at least delay the onset of cancer, and the growth of it probably also. I was at a ball game, sitting out in the sun for several hours. I looked down after about the 5th inning and everything's red like a lobster, right? I was absolutely certain that I was going to have the usual response. It's going to be excruciatingly painful. Instead, it just started to fade away. No inflammation.
Would glycine be a problem if you have low blood pressure?
Everything having to do with glycine at all has been like finding those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. Put your hand down onto the pile of pieces, you find another piece that fits. And when it turns out to be something cheap and harmless.
Today we're going to do another Q&A episode with Dr. Brind because you have literally thousands of questions for this man and we are trying to just keep up with them. And so if anyone's new to the topic, Dr. Brind has written the book, The Glycine Miracle. He's been studying amino acids, specifically glycine, for decades. And his major discovery is that this glycine gap many of us have today, 8 to 10 grams, because we're not eating enough, we're not making enough. It could be leading to unnecessary inflammation. And I'll link to other videos where we dive into that deeply. And also where you can find his Sweetamine product, which fills that glycine gap, along with other methods like eating bone broth or just the whole animal. But for the first one, I mean, it's one that we've gone over so many times, but this is the single most common question, and it's one that I forgot to ask you in the last Q&A. So people are talking about this new paper that came out about glycine, and I think it's sarcosine-and-cancer. Is there new research that we need to be worried about? You break this down in your book, The Glycine Miracle. But can you give us a high-level overview of the relationship between glycine and maybe sarcosine and cancer?
Yeah, sarcosine is actually a product of, I talked about the enzyme glycine N-methyltransferase. When glycine accepts a methyl group, it becomes sarcosine, right? That's what chemistry does. Things get transformed from one thing into another thing. So methylglycine, N-methylglycine, aka sarcosine. There's a group that was studying cancer. They were actually studying prostate cancer. Now, when you study prostate cancer in cell biology, there's another big caveat about cell biology, and that is cells, when you're studying cells in the test tube, you isolate cells and you study them, and then you transfer them from one generation to the next in test tubes or petri dishes, basically, right? They're actually sort of a combination of a test tube petri dish. They're called a culture flask. Well, so what you have to do is, if you want to test, let's say you want to test a compound to see if it kills a certain kind of cancer cell, or it makes a certain kind of cancer cell stop growing, whatever it does. You want to test a certain substance on it. What do you need to be scientific about it? You need a control, right? So you can't just test it against cancer cells. You have to see what it does to normal cells. Great. One trouble with culturing normal cells you can't culture indefinitely. They're finite. After some number of passages from one generation to the next, one tissue culture flask to the next, they die out. Well, that's no good. We need controls that you can buy from the American Type Culture Collection that they've been using for 20, 30, 50 years, and have the same cell types so that we can be sure that what we are observing is the same observation under the same conditions that they observed 30, 40, 50 years ago. And that's a legitimate concern. Yeah. So how do we deal with that? Well, we have to find an alternative to a normal control. And that alternative is usually something called an RWPE cell, which is a cell that was derived from a human tumor, a prostate tumor that's not a cancerous tumor, but it's also not normal. It's a tumor that sort of behaves itself, and then when you stimulate it, like with a lot of androgen, like prostate cancer is like that. In prostate cancer, the big difference is whether you have an androgen-sensitive, an androgen-dependent tumor, or a non-androgen-dependent tumor. So what these RWPE cells really are, they're sort of cancer-like, because if you put a lot of androgens in, if the androgen content is high, or if you use certain other substances like sarcosine, they will become cancerous. They will behave like cancerous cells. So they're kind of like pseudo-cancers. But they're used as controls because if you don't stimulate them that way, they kind of look like normal prostate cells. Except they're not. Because you can make sarcosine, make them malignant and invasive in their behavior, it's to say, oh, sarcosine, it can take normal cells and make them into cancer cells. No, it can't. But it can take these cells which are kind of almost cancer and tip them into the cancerous behavior kind of mode. So, and that, well, if you have a lot of glycine, you get rid of the glycine, you make more sarcosine. Well, sarcosine they were using is like, the sarcosine concentrations they were using was pretty high, actually. Very high to get that much sarcosine in your blood. It usually doesn't really get out of the cell as sarcosine. But the other thing is they had to revise their findings 5 years later. Another paper came out by the same group, and in the abstract it says, we found the RWPE cells can be induced to become malignant and invasive with sarcosine, but not glycine. The original paper, when they added glycine, it did that, but then they kind of retracted that finding. The glycine doesn't do that. It's just sarcosine. When you get into cell culture, you have very particular conditions under which you can induce cells to actually survive in those very, very artificial conditions. So those cells now, they're pretty artificial cells. And even though they may be human cells, or even though they may be human-derived cancer cells, or human-derived normal, quasi-normal cells, it's a very big leap from tissue culture into the whole body dynamics of, what you eat. So that's a difficulty there. The other difficulty with cancer is that, because there was another paper that came out about breast cancer, which was about how breast cancer cells especially can use glycine more efficiently than normal cells.
Yeah.
So that, if you give more glycine, oh my God, the cancer cells are going to grow a lot more. But not necessarily so. Again, in those studies, they showed that it was actually the amount of glycine that they added to make the cells grow more invasively and more aggressively was a concentration of 100 micromolar glycine. If you didn't give them any glycine, they behaved, they weren't any more aggressive than normal cells. If you gave them 100 micromolar glycine, they would just take off. Well, 100 micromolar glycine is actually below the normal range of plasma glycine. So everybody has that much glycine in your blood. It's not really a matter of supplementing, it's a matter of having any, which of course you do. You still have a lot because your body makes a lot, just not enough. So that really doesn't apply. And what it also does, it also fleshes out the bigger picture about cancer research. I mean, cancer research was my first desire professionally. When I was 10 years old, I decided I wanted to be a biochemist, to be a cancer researcher, to cure cancer. And I'm still not an expert, because if there's one expert, cancer's done.
Right? Yeah.
Right?
We figured it out.
I'm not an expert, and nobody else is an expert in cancer, really, because they can't fix it. Right?
Yeah.
They can't tell you why it happens and how to make it not happen and how to stop it once it happens. Right? Then, if you could, you'd be an expert. So that's what I wanted to do, was to get what it is that makes cells cancer. And so one of the ways of looking at cancer is ecologically, because what cancer cells do is once a cell becomes cancerous, it's sort of off on its own. It's not listening to the normal controls and prompts from normal body chemistry. It's ignoring growth signals or stop growth signals. It's just doing its own thing. Right? It's now gone rogue, and it's just trying to grow as fast as it can and eat whatever it can, and eventually destroys the body. So in the process of cancers developing, and inflammation, by the way, is understood now to provide a breeding ground for cancer, so that cancer is more likely to develop when you have a lot of systemic inflammation. So glycine probably should at least, it doesn't prevent cancer absolutely, because we know, for example, from animal studies, they still die of cancer, they die later, so it at least would seem to delay the onset of cancer, and the growth of it probably also. But in any case, it goes through a kind of a Darwinian selection process. You have all of these cells now that have gone rogue, maybe millions of different cells have gone rogue, and what happens? Well, your immune system targets them, goes after it, kills this one, kills that one. The tumor starts, it wipes out this tumor, that tumor, the other thing, where they just can't compete. So what cells can compete enough to become like a viable cancer? What is the selection process that makes a cancer actually develop and become a successful cancer, if you will? Successful in terms of dangerous and capable of killing the body. Well, in terms of body chemistry, in terms of amino acid chemistry, we find that we have known now for a few decades, and there is a treatment modality, the Hoffman Clinic out in California still uses this, that exploits the fact that cancer cells are very deficient are more dependent on methionine. Methionine is essential amino acid, but it can at least be, there's the biochemical machineries that are regenerated and recycle it. But in cancer cells, in many cancer cells, they have a defective machinery for recycling methionine. Why? They don't need it, because you're in a body that's high in methionine. There's lots of methionine in the blood, and so cancers are used to developing, and the most successful cancers will develop in this high methionine environment by not wasting the metabolic energy on recycling methionine. They don't have to. So that's why a majority, I think, of human cancers actually are shown to be more methionine dependent than normal cells. In an analogous way, these breast cancer cell lines seem to be more efficient at utilizing glycine. Why? Because they arise in a low glycine environment, so they're more efficient at utilizing low levels of glycine. So the increased glycine utilization of many cancers and the increased dependence on methionine, on the other hand, of many cancers, is traceable to the imbalance that's there in a body in which this cancer develops. That is to say, it tends to be methionine rich and glycine poor, with those two amino acids out of balance. So that's really what these cases, I think, illustrate. They don't really illustrate that, oh, you shouldn't supplement with glycine, because you're not going to be able to reduce the glycine without killing somebody to a level that this cancer is not going to be able to utilize better than a normal cell can. That's the problem, So it's trying to draw these real life, whole body, human body conclusions from literally stuff that goes on in a test tube, and it's dangerous.
It is. Thank you, Dr. Brind. That's so helpful. And of course, if you're going through cancer, talk to your doctor, not medical advice. Okay, question 2. Is there any uncomfortable detox symptoms when you take glycine, like flu, nausea, or headache?
There are a few people who experience that. You can find that even in WebMD. There are a few people with GI symptoms. Few people will actually get diarrhea from taking glycine, and basically, for the most part, this seems to be the fact that when you take a glycine supplement as the free amino acid, that's not really the way you usually eat it. The way you sell it, as bone broth, is more a natural way to do it, because it doesn't get absorbed until it's been digested. So for someone who, the easy peasy way, you get Sweetamine, put it as a sweetener in your coffee or tea, whatever you like. But if it gives you any digestive issues, go over to Autumn here and get some of her bone broth. It's delicious.
Okay.
And it's just as easy to use, really, and and it will give you, glycine is glycine, not L-glycine, D-glycine. So it's a matter of whether it's the free amino acid, whether it needs digestion or not. If it's the free amino acid, it will go in more rapidly, and this is why it tends to cause, some kinds of symptoms. Some people even get dizzy or faint from eating it, rapidly. So but again, these are very few people who experience this. But when you sell millions of servings, like the old McDonald's sign, some millions served, somebody billions served. I've sold millions of servings, many millions of servings now of Sweetamine. I've been selling it for 15 years. You find out about all the outliers and the minorities and the people who are genetic variants who are sensitive to this or that. And but the important thing is to know that it's safe. It's not going to hurt you. Nobody's ever been harmed by taking a glycine supplement. If it makes you sick or queasy or uncomfortable in any way, you stop taking it, those symptoms go away. Whatever bad symptoms you're experiencing from taking a few doses, a few servings of glycine, when you stop doing it, those symptoms will go away.
Yeah. And you can try the food-based versions, right? But also some people are sensitive to food-based versions.
That's right.
They have histamine intolerance, so bone broth wouldn't be the best way to go. Maybe you want to just eat the whole animal. And so, everybody is going to have a unique response.
Right, all kinds of things are possible. There are people who will drop dead if they eat a peanut. And so what does that mean? You can't sell peanuts? And then we'll all starve to death because of a small minority, because there is always a small minority to every food who can't eat it for some reason or another. But by and large, the general population, it's fine. If it doesn't agree with you totally, you might be able to tweak it one way or another. As I say, take bone broth, take collagen peptides or whatever. But get your glycine one way or another, because everybody needs it. That's the thing. Yeah. So get it one way or another.
I love that. Okay, another one. What about people with thyroid problems? I have difficulty with vitamin absorption. Ask Dr. Brind what to do for high blood pressure. I can't get mine down. Seems like a lot of questions in that one, but...
Well, you know what? I have high blood pressure and I take losartan.
Okay, so you can. Okay, that's one way.
Yeah.
How
and
would
I know
glycine
why.
affect
I have a particular mutation in the losartan is an angiotensin receptor blocker, and angiotensin stimulates the secretion in the adrenals of a mineralocorticoid called aldosterone, and aldosterone increases your absorption of sodium and raises your blood pressure. So you will make less aldosterone if you take this losartan inhibitor. Well, I happen to have a gene mutation that results in increased synthesis of aldosterone. So I tend to be, so my hypertension is hyperaldosteronism type hypertension. I take medicine for it. So if you have high blood pressure, talk to your doctor. Let him give you medicine or her give you medicine for it. I'm not a doctor at all. PhD. I'm a scientist. I'm not a clinician.
What about with low blood pressure? I've seen people ask that too. Would glycine be a problem if you have low blood pressure?
No, I know my daughter has low blood pressure. She tends to have low blood pressure, but glycine, it's fine. No, it doesn't. Glycine doesn't affect blood pressure except if you have that sort of reactive. If you're one of the few people who might have some reactive hypotensive reaction where all of a sudden when you have a lot of glycine comes in, your blood pressure will drop and you may get faint or queasy. But
okay.
No, it generally, no, for general metabolism, for general people, vast majority of people, it has no effect on blood pressure up or down, no.
Okay, and what about, people were asking about trimethylglycine and creatine. Creatine is all the rage. Okay, if they're taking creatine, do we still need glycine? And what about trimethylglycine and glycine?
Well, glycine will increase the production of creatine because it's a precursor of creatine. So it might help your creatine that way. If you still want to take creatine supplements, that's fine. What you have to watch out for is that the blood tests that they use, the standard combination complete metabolic profile, that's typically what they do. They take a drop of your serum and they put it in a machine. It tells you what your electrolytes are, it tells you what your enzymes, the liver functions, kidney function, everything like that. Well, the kidney function is actually based on an algorithm that measures your urea and your creatinine in your blood. And glycine is the major precursors for urea, so it will tend to raise the urea. It might, and sometimes mine does, raise it above the normal range, and so it looks like it's compromising your kidney function. So they say, oh no, your kidney function is down, but it's not. It raises your synthesis of creatine and creatinine, which is made from creatine. The reason why it affects the blood test is because the blood test is based on an algorithm on creatine metabolism, on creatine content, because creatine content is very, very, very stable. It's made by muscles, and it usually does not change. Through thick or thin, year after year, people's creatinine levels don't change. So it's a stable thing, and it's used as a base to calculate renal clearance, kidney clearance. And if your creatinine goes up, it's a sign then that your kidneys are having trouble getting rid of it. Or you may be taking a supplement that's converted to creatine, and that's why your creatine is going up from increased synthesis. So what I tell people is, if you're taking a glycine supplement like Sweetamine, stop taking it 3 days before a blood test. Give it 72 hours before you have whatever blood test you're scheduled for that's going to measure your kidney function. And then you should be all right, because glycine goes through you very quickly.
But taking creatine will not negate the necessity of also taking glycine.
No, because the glycine itself has that important role, in inflammation that I've been talking about. Your body does not make glycine from creatine, but it will make creatine from glycine.
Nice. And trimethylglycine, you could take it and it would have glycine, but maybe not enough.
Well, it'll make glycine, but very inefficiently. Trimethylglycine is good for people who are low methylators. That's actually a fairly high minority of the population. Something like between 10 and 20% of the population are low methylators. If you're listening, you know what I'm talking about. Low methylators, you may have a mutation called C677T, which is a mutation in one of the enzymes that regenerates methionine. So here's what happens. After you eat that cheeseburger, right, methionine rich for lunch, because it's so rich in methionine, for the next hour or two, your liver is basically getting rid of the methionine, all that excess methionine. But then what happens? An hour after that, now it needs to recycle the methionine that it has to keep it going enough to the next time you eat. Well, but what happens if your machinery for recycling the methionine is deficient, like if you're a low methylator? Now all of a sudden you're going to be low in methionine. So that in that case, There's three things you can do. You can take a methionine supplement. My favorite methionine supplement is Brazil nuts.
Yeah, I
You
love
take
that.
3 Brazil nuts. It's basically 100 milligrams of methionine, which is a great snack in between meals. Or you can take also methylfolate. Methylfolate is that part of the recycling of methionine step, the regeneration of which is defective if you're a low methylator. So in other words, it's called MTHFR, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. It's the one that generates methylfolate, and methylfolate's only role in the body is to recharge homocysteine, turn it back into methionine. So if you take methylfolate or you take trimethylglycine, because trimethylglycine feeds an alternative to the methionine cycle, an alternative regenerator of methionine from homocysteine called betaine homocysteine methyltransferase, as opposed to methionine synthase. So there's two different, alternative routes. So trimethylglycine will stimulate the alternative route of regenerating methionine. Methionine will just give you methionine straight up out of the Brazil nut, as a snack or other high methionine containing protein snack, or methylglycine, which will actually provide that missing piece that's not being regenerated properly in your liver. And you can try any combination of these things and see what works best for you for sustaining energy and stamina and whatever, especially if you know that you have one of these low methylator mutations. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't have glycine. You're still going to need just as much glycine as someone who doesn't have that condition. And taking glycine, as we found out in our original hypothesis in our work published back in 2011, adding glycine does not increase the clearance of methionine, so it's not going to affect that.
Yeah, and the same goes for N-acetylcysteine and glutathione, right? They are, part of them is glycine, but not necessarily enough to close the glycine gap.
Well, glutathione, if you take glutathione, that's like taking collagen in terms of supplying external glycine. N-acetylcysteine will not substitute for glycine. It will help regenerate glutathione, which will be depleted if you take Tylenol or the generic acetaminophen. If you take acetaminophen as a painkiller, whenever you do it, you should take NAC, N-acetylcysteine, as a supplement to prevent the destruction of glutathione, which is made from glycine, glutamate, and cysteine. It's tripeptide, 3 amino acids, but one of them is glycine, which means it has exactly as much glycine as collagen does, pound for pound. It's about 24%. So people say, oh, I'm trying this, glutathione supplement. I'm taking 6 grams of glutathione and it works great, or something like that. Well, you're also getting, a couple of grams of glycine out of that. So it's one of those, there's a few supplements like that. There's glutathione actually gives you a lot of glycine. Magnesium glycinate gives you a lot of glycine. That's 86% glycine. So if you take your 300 milligrams of magnesium, those 2 big horse tablets, you add it up, you're actually getting 2 grams of glycine. Yeah. It's not 8 grams, but it's enough to feel the difference in people who are glycine deficient, which is most of us.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I want to end on quick medical question. So if somebody has kidney disease, can they take glycine in large amounts?
Again, you have to talk to your doctor, and it would be important to test your kidney function when you're not taking a glycine supplement, all right? Because otherwise they'll, maybe you don't have kidney disease or it's borderline, you start taking Sweetamine and they say, oh my God, your kidneys have gotten a lot worse. And maybe they've actually gotten better.
Yeah.
So just, again, you have to, when you have a medical condition, you got to talk to a medical guy or a medical gal, and I'm not one of them. I'm a science guy, right?
Yep. And the same goes, someone was wondering about having low platelets in the 4 to 20,000. Also, I have chronic inflammation of 5 years, had a heart attack and a cancer diagnosis already. You got to talk to your doctor. I wish we could give you better advice.
No, and probably glycine is a good thing to have, but once you get into serious illness, you can't just start running experiments like that,
Yeah.
Oh, this guy says glycine's good. Yeah, but all of these things, nutritional advice like this is predicated on you having normal physiology. And maybe, something's bothering you, you have aches and pains or whatever, but you're generally healthy. Otherwise, you take this, it makes you feel better, that's fine. It's not going to make you sick. It is not going to harm you. I mean, that's another reason been selling it for 15 years without worrying that anybody was ever going to get sick or harmed from it. Nobody has. I'm sure I would have heard about it. But Yeah, but once you have a condition that requires medical attention, you got to see a medical professional. It's kind of a no-brainer. There may be a prejudice. There often is a prejudice on medical practitioners against something, and they'll say, "Oh, you have this condition or that condition, or you need surgery or whatever you need. Stop all supplements." Well, I don't think that's necessarily very wise, but then again, that's your doctor. If you don't like what your doctor says, get another doctor. But don't use me as a substitute doctor, because I'm not.
Yeah. Okay, and last question for this episode is the optimal timing and the dose. Dr. Brind, do you have to split it up? Can you take it all at once? And how many grams? Just say it again.
Okay, I take 8 grams a day, and I take it all at once. Sometimes I've taken to splitting it up, because I've taken to doing 2 I used to take coffee 3 times a day. Then I had coffee 2 times a day, and then I went to coffee 1 time a day and 0, and then I went back to just once in the morning. And now I have half the amount of coffee, like a regular cup, not a big mug, once in the morning and once in the evening. Just my own personal regimen. And I like to have a half a serving of. Now, actually, in my coffee, and then I like to have it sometimes in lemon juice in the morning. I like to have glycine in lemon juice. It makes lemon juice drinkable as a nice tasting juice. So you can take half in the morning, half at night, all of it at night, all of it in the morning. I used to take all of it in the morning. It doesn't have any effect on me or my sleep. However, there is definitely for a lot of people, and there's definitely good science behind it, because glycine has an effect as a neurotransmitter in your central nervous system in affecting sleep, and that is to say it enables you to sleep. It doesn't make you sleepy, but it will help you sleep. It's sort of a general kind of a calm down effect as an inhibitory neurotransmitter in your central nervous system. And also there's evidence that it works specifically to cause vasodilatation and lowering body temperature, which when you lower your core temperature, that's part of having good sleep and all of that. So many people do take glycine for sleep, and if they have trouble sleeping, if you want to take Sweetamine and have it help you for that, take it at night. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. But if you want it to help you sleep, take it at night. Now, there have been posts by some people who say, "Well, I take glycine and it keeps me up, and I can't take." There's always genetic variants. People who are just wired a little differently than everybody else. And I remember my mother was, whenever they tried to give her a tranquilizer, in a dentist's office or whatever, whenever they gave her something like Valium, it would just be like, she would have the opposite reaction. So there are these,
paradoxical responders.
Paradoxical, yes, paradoxical.
Well, awesome, Dr. Brind. And like you said, 8 grams comes in one Sweetamine packet. 8 to 10 grams are what people recommend for filling that glycine gap from food and supplements a day.
Yeah.
I drink mine in bone broth. Eat the whole animal. There's so many ways to do it. But
and by the way, if you want to read about it all in my glycine book, which I yet to talk about today, the Glycine Miracle book is available on Amazon. So just look up my name, look up glycine, you'll find the Glycine Miracle. And the reason why I have to tell you that to go to Amazon is because I don't sell books on my website. Sweetamine.com is just for selling Sweetamine. If we started selling books or non-food items, all of a sudden it's the sales tax consequences come in, and then it's just this way. If you want to have the glycine book, go to Amazon. On Sweetamine.com, you will find a link to the book, but it's a link to the Amazon site, and you have to buy it from them.
I'll put that link in the description too. And I forgot there was one other important question that people were wondering: the 40-year transformation. So when you started taking big gram doses, like 10 to 40 gram doses,
I took 40 grams a day for a month. Yeah.
What were the changes that you saw?
I didn't see any changes at all for years. I didn't notice anything because, again, I was still pretty young and healthy. I generally tried to eat a healthy diet, or what was known and believed to be a healthy diet, and anti-inflammatory and all of that. So I started taking glycine every day when I was 57 years old. But I was still healthy before, and I didn't notice anything. However, the main aha moments were when I fell off a stack of sheetrock onto a concrete floor 4 feet directly onto my tailbone, and it hurt like crazy, and I managed to go dancing that night. Finished what I was doing that day, went dancing a few hours later, and the next day I was fine except for a big bruise. And then the same year in 2010, I was at a ball game sitting out in the sun for several hours, and it was around June 10th, right near the solstice, not a cloud in the sky, no obstructions, no hat on my head, short sleeve shirt, shorts. I looked down after about the 5th inning, and everything's red like a lobster, right? So I knew I had done it to myself. I hadn't done this to myself since I was in my 20s at least, and I knew, I was absolutely certain that I was going to have the usual response. It was going to be excruciatingly painful to get dressed, undressed, bathed, all of that for the next few days. And instead, it just started to fade away. No inflammation. And that's when those are the aha moments that led to the discovery that it is not a normal reaction to injury or sunburn, anything like that. It's really just to infection. Now we go on to infection in the case of being an overreaction even to infection, right? So not only do you react when you shouldn't react, but you overreact when you should react a little less. So, for example, I always had problems with periodontitis. I had lots of cavities when I was a kid. And I didn't floss, not because I was too lazy to floss, but because it hurt to floss. I would try to floss between my teeth and my gums would start to bleed. And it was, it would seem to be doing more harm than good. I noticed, and I don't even know when it happened. I only noticed years after I started taking glycine supplements that I don't have that anymore. There's no inflammation in my mouth anymore. There's, when my teeth get cleaned, it used to be a bloody, painful mess. Now it's not.
Amazing.
And then there's scientific evidence for that, for periodontitis. And what do you have there? There you have a lot of bacteria, and there is that barrier. You're trying to, the bacteria are getting into your bloodstream to some extent, and now they talk about a connection between periodontitis and heart disease. And they're thinking about what is the route by which the bacteria get into your bloodstream, and they get into endocarditis and stuff like that. And it may have to do with really just that it's just an overreaction to these bugs that naturally exist in your mouth. They cause this kind of irritation of your immune system to make it cause inflammation. So that was another area of things that you'll notice if other things happen, like certain disease processes. Like I got shingles in 2015. I got shingles, so I was 64 years old, and it was it was classical case. I went to my friend, the neurologist. He says, "Yep, classic shingles. You got that typical rash, lower back." Unilateral rash that has shingles written all over it. Very classical, except there was one slight deviation, and that is there was no pain whatsoever. It was tender, if I poked at it or irritated it or something like that, but I just felt it. I only knew I had that rash because I felt the rash with my fingers, that there were, what are these bumps on my skin, and I had to check with a mirror and see, oh, that looks like shingles. And there's a lot of evidence for that from customers of mine now over the years. They get shingles, and it's painless. So that is a key. It's a real thing. And there's other evidence that these the viruses are sort of stimulated. I was just reading something recently. It may have been about cancer or some effect of the virus. What is it? Herpes simplex that causes shingles, causes chickenpox when you're a kid and shingles when you're older. There was some segue to that. It has to do with, I'm sure, some reaction to it, because we know now that a body that's deficient in glycine overreacts to the herpes simplex virus, just like it overreacts to COVID virus. COVID, wow. that was a killer of a lot of people who were glycine deficient. All the comorbidities were conditions of low glycine, obesity, diabetes, old age, all conditions of low glycine. What did they die of? They died of cytokine storm, excessive inflammation in the lungs. I got COVID in 2021, and it was a classic case of COVID. I had a fever of 102 that lasted for less than a day, and a bout of diarrhea that lasted a day, and I felt this malaise that lasted a few weeks, and I lost my sense of smell that lasted a few weeks, and all of that. Everything very classic, except no respiratory symptoms at all. As far as I was concerned, COVID was not a respiratory illness. Not one cough, not one sneeze, not one wheeze, never short of breath. Just felt like crap, but I had shingles. Yeah. It was not fun. It felt like a really bad case of intestinal flu that hung around and all of that, but that's it. That was it. And again, I had other friends and customers who went through the same thing. One of them who had just had lung surgery less than a year prior. That took a long, long time to recover from. And then she got shingles. Oh my God, no big deal. Because she was taking glycine every day, taking Sweetamine every day. So, you notice it, it's all, that's one of the ways when a discovery is really on the right track, when there's no sort of, wait a minute, how do you explain that? That seems different than everything else. And that's the kind of finding that surprises you, and then maybe you go off and find out what's that all about, right? That's the continuing story of science. But everything having to do with glycine, it all has been like finding those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle You know, you do a jigsaw puzzle and can't get anywhere, and you find like two pieces that go together. All of a sudden, you see the pattern, and then all of a sudden, every piece, every time you put your hand down onto the pile of pieces, you find another piece that fits, and it fits, and it fits, and it fits into a coherent picture. And when it turns out to be something cheap and harmless, and a natural nutrient, oh my goodness, why wouldn't you just sell it? Why would you just allow it to be secret by keeping it a debate among an arcane group of scientists who don't want to believe it, you know, because they all have their own fish to fry. So this way, that's why I went into business doing it, to make it available. And the more people buy it, the more more money I can put into promoting it, and then it becomes, you know, more common knowledge. That's the idea.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brind, for driving that glycine bus. You've certainly helped me. I feel so much better. And now that you said that HPV virus and you're preventing your body from overreacting, I also have both genes for Alzheimer's, and I know HPV virus and Alzheimer's, there's a connection. So I'm just thinking, like, in so many ways, my present life and my future life, I just thank you. So
HPV
thank you.
and Alzheimer's as a
I guess there's a connection. I've read about that.
Oh,
like
okay.
HPV
I haven't read
virus.
that.
So I was just saying, thank you. Everybody, keep your comments coming. Go check out Sweetamine. I'll put all the links in the description.
Also, I should say, when I say that I felt fine and everything like that, I thought I felt fine, you know, for all those years, like I was in my 60s. But then I was noticing I'd go out in the winter in upstate New York, and I would, you know, shovel snow for an hour, and you know, the next day I'd be sore. But after I started with Sweetamine, with the glycine, I'd shovel snow for an hour, and I never got sore. So I felt I was fine, but you feel more fine. Things that were bothering you, ordinary aches and pains that you wrote off as part of normal life, normal strain and stress. No, it's not. It's really just a deficiency syndrome. But it may be. You try it. It doesn't hurt you to try it. You know, it's risk-free to try it. And if it doesn't help, or it actually makes you feel worse for one reason or another, or you have some kind of illness that you need medically treated, well, talk to your doctor. But everybody needs glycine one way or another.
Wise final words. So thank you, Dr. Brind. This has been enlightening as always, and we just truly appreciate your perseverance.